Well, hey, all you wiretappers out there in Gangland Wire land, especially you guys up in Chicago. I've done several stories on Chicago. I'm on a Chicago trip right now, I guess. I'm going to do one more with our friend Mr. Cooley, Bob Cooley. We just haven't set up a time yet, but I'm going to do one more with him for sure. But I'm going to keep some of these Chicago stories up. I got such a great reaction. You guys, like and share these, as they say, on the apps and on YouTube. But anyhow, let's go back to March of 1967. There was a real well-known reporter named Bob Wiedrich. At the time, he really covered the mob in Chicago. I mean, he might as well been a member of the mob in Chicago. He was so close to with so many people up there, and he had some really good sources and some inside tracks. And he went to a party, but he wasn't invited to that party. They never really were going to invite Bob Wiedrich to a party. It was $25 a plate. There was about 300 outfit mobsters and their associates attended this party, some of their political associates even. They called a chief of police and I think a mayor of a suburban city. It was at the Edgewater Hotel. It was sponsored by the Santa Fe Saddle and Gun Club. It was to honor the birthday of outfit enforcer and killer and loan shark Fiore Fifi Buccieri. Fifi was a vicious killer, man. I mean, he was bad, straight out of the Capone days, and he was kind of best known in more modern times. It happened not too long before this party, I believe, or around this time, maybe right after. He took part in the multi-day, I believe, 3-day torture and murder of a bookie, a great big fat bookie named William Action Jackson. There's some images, some pictures, a picture of him in his trunk was showing a lot of the torture that they did to him out there. I've seen it on the internet. They kind of cut back on those pictures and try to keep those from getting circulated around on Facebook and some of the social media apps. So I assume it's still out there. But anyhow, the bureau had a hidden microphone in a guy's house, Jackie the Lackey Cerrone, who was Accardo's driver at the time. Had a hidden microphone in there, and Jackie Cerrone and a couple others, and one of them was Fifi Buccieri, I don't remember who else it was, were laughing about Action Jackson's reactions to the cattle prod and some of the other gruesome details. They thought he was talking to the hated FBI agent Bill Romer at the time, but in fact, he was not. He wasn't talking to anybody. I did find one blurb where he was thought to be a child molester. So, I don't know. And thinking it was a child of one of his girlfriends or something like that. I'm not sure. But anyhow, they tortured the heck out of him for about 3 days. Fifi came out of the 42 gang. If you remember, it was Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. So that meant there was 41 in Alibaba's gang, and they wanted to have one more than Alibaba, so they named themselves the 42 gang. This party happened just as Sam Giancana was getting out of jail. He didn't attend, and he left for Mexico about that time to avoid further grand jury appearances. He'd been in jail about a year, I think, because they give him the old give you a immunity, and you have to testify. If you don't, then they find you in contempt of court and send you to a penitentiary or a jail for a year or so for the length of the grand jury. And so he left town right after that and went down to Mexico for several years. Some speculate this meeting was to get everybody together in one place and have some private meetings off the side without law enforcement really knowing what was going on, where Accardo and Paul the Waiter Rica would name Joy Dubs Iupa as the new boss in place of Giancana and make some other personnel shifts. A few years later, when Giancana comes back, there'll be a whole string of murders around the time he's murdered because of some of his people that were always loyal to Giancana. Now, this Santa Fe Saddle and Gun Club. Has anybody ever heard of that? I had not heard of this before. It was a registered club. The president was a Joseph Scaramuza, who owned a gun store at Halstead and Taylor, which is, I believe, that's right down there in the middle of Mobland. There was an informant in the JFK files. As I was researching Scaramuza, there was an informant that claimed that Scaramuza knew Jack Ruby well. And as they checked into Scaramuza over that, they found that this Halstead gun store that he owned had sold 3 pistols that were recovered after some Puerto Rican terrorists shot up the House of Representatives a few years before. Now, what all that means, I don't know. But and I remember that when I was a little kid, these Puerto Ricans, they were trying to assassinate Harry Truman, who was staying out of the White House in the Blair House, uh, which is, I think, maybe that's where the vice president stays sometimes. I'm not sure. Anyhow, he was not in the White House, and they had a plan to assassinate him. They also went into the House of Representatives and shot it up. They wanted complete freedom from the United States at the time. Now, there's not been any Puerto Rican freedom movement since that I know of. Anyhow, the Edgewater Beach was a faded but once grand dame of hotels along Lake Michigan. They had their own beach for a while, and then something moved in between them and the beach, and it was about to declare bankruptcy. It was located, for you guys that live in Chicago, it was 5555 North Sheridan. Uh, and now members of the Chicago Police Intelligence Unit had found out about that themselves, just like Wiedrich had. Maybe they hip Wiedrich to it. That all works, all that little undercover stuff. You have a employee at the Edgewater who knows somebody, and the work starts leaking out. When you have something this big, you have 300 people there, and it was really to make some money too. Charge $25 a plate, and they did another little fundraiser. They've been selling raffle tickets all over Chicago and all like down in northwestern Indiana, anywhere that the outfit had some kind of influence and businesses that they could hold up. It's like policemen. We used to go out and sell circus tickets. They were like $2 a ticket, but it wasn't really for a ticket. It was like support the police circus, which then gave a piece of the money to some police or widows and orphans fund. I don't remember it exactly. This is when I was brand new, and you were given like a handful of circus tickets, and you're supposed to go out to your local businessmen and sell them. Of course, they always bought them. All you had to do is go in and say, I got some police tickets or circus tickets, and they'd buy them. And they weren't exactly even a ticket; they were a coupon, and then they'll help go buy a ticket. But anyhow, that's what they were doing, and that's where they were. Um, Intelligence unit was milling around the hotel. They were, I think what they were trying to do was waiting to see if the operators of this banquet, as this thing got going, if somebody actually, you know, made a drawing or raffled off a new car, which is what supposedly the raffle tickets were for, which would give them an excuse then to raid this place, saying it was an illegal lottery, and then start really identifying the participants, all of them that were there, make them everybody give you ID and all that. And then they were really loaded for bear. They had 65 cops waiting close by at something called the Foster Avenue Beach. So it was it was a hell of an operation. Now, the outfit during this time learned that the cops were gonna be there, and someone called Tony Accardo and Paula Wiedrich, who were, supposed to be there. They were like the headliners. They were the big ducks at that show, and really, if it was about having some meetings to realign personnel and name, maybe they're gonna have a making ceremony, but I doubt that. But maybe they were gonna name, Joy Aiupa as the new boss because he was the next boss. Somebody warned him not to come. And of course, Jackie the Lackey Cerrone didn't show up either because he was Accardo's driver. I'm gonna tell you about some of the people the cops did find there and identify. Ross Prio, his North Side loan shark and enforcer who had been Giancana's second in command and was reportedly consulted on all outfit murders. Now, Ross Prio, he'd been around. I can't remember. I think he was out of the 42 gang himself. He had been around since the Capone days and a well-respected guy, had a lot of guys under him, and he was a bad dude. He was a bad actor. He was dangerous as hell and could take part in torture and the whole 9 yards. They saw Irving Weiner there. He was a mob-connected bail bondsman. He was a guy who ended up a few years later walking with Alan Dorfman when somebody came up behind Dorfman and shot and killed him. Dorfman was their big guy in the Teamsters. Dorfman had helped him get those loans out of the Teamsters pension fund and loan to people that wanted to buy Las Vegas casinos. Then everybody would get a kickback from those casinos. So he was integral. He was being investigated as an official of the twin food products company, and he had partners Felix Milwaukee Phil Aldericio and Sam Teach Battaglia and Marshall Caifano. I mean, this guy is Irv Weiner. He was a money man for the mob, well known as a money man, and he was involved with Lombardo, Joe Lombardo, and Tony Splatro, and some others. And they got a loan for a guy named from the Teamsters Fund, but for a guy named Danny Seifert. They thought Danny Seifert had started a company with a lot of this money, and he was going to testify about how he got this Teamsters loan, is my understanding. And I believe Lombardo and probably Frank Sweet showed up and killed him one day. He never spent a night in jail. Wiener never spent a night in jail. Go figure that. He's kind of like, almost like Tony Accardo, huh? I saw a guy named Mike Glitta. He was an outfit member who had B-girl bars, had these kind of hustling bars, and was involved, heavily involved in the porn business now. Uh, there was a lot of porn shops in Chicago, and Glitta was really, well, he was the guy on the porn shops. Chicago Crime Commission published something that said he supervised all pornography operations in an area that went from the near north side clear to the Wisconsin state line. So everything from, say, Rush Street on north was his. I guess he wasn't down in, I think Old Town is where Red Wilmette and some porn shops down there, and Frank Sweet was extorting money from some of them. Mob watchers claimed that Glitta always reported directly to Vincent Solano, who was a labor union leader and a capo, and the guy that probably had Tokyo Joe Ito killed. He was a racket boss on the north side and all the way up to the north suburbs. Identified a guy called Larry the Hood, who I'd seen that name before. It's a really hard name to pronounce. Bonagidi. He was a mob wannabe at the time. As I researched into him, he was really just a wannabe. He hung around the Rush Street bars, and he was associated with Mike Glitta. And he'll eventually get an opportunity when Ross Prio dies, and Mike Glitta has a heart attack, and he moves on up real quick because he's always in there around, and he knows the porn business and the B-girl bars on that near north side, and he's the one that goes around and collects after Glitta has a heart attack. Another North Side vice boss named Joe Caesar or Joseph DeBarco, he was dropped off by an underling driver. He came out of the 42 gang himself and is a well-known gangster on the Rush Street area. Dominic DeBello was a North Side gambling operator, and he was seen with a friend of his and a fellow gambling operator named Bill Gold, or called Bill Gold. He had a longer name than that, and I don't know him. But you guys make comments down below if you know who this Bill Gold was and what the story was with him. He probably just ran a sports book or something, or helped with the off-track betting outlets. And they arrived just before a guy named Joseph Cortino, according to the newspaper report. He was a former Forest Park chief of police. He was suspected of protecting gambling operations and leaking law enforcement information to the mob. Guy you hear about mentioned, I've not really seen much on in detail, Willie Massino, and they called him Wee Willie because he was little, but he was supposedly really, really a bad character. Here's a guy when I believe it was Mario Ranon was invited to go on some kind of a crime, and he saw Willie Massino and somebody else in the area, and he said, "Uh-oh, if those guys are anywhere in the area where I am and they've got me kind of isolated like this, going to do a crime, so I'm not telling anybody where I'm going or what I'm doing and who I'm with, they're gonna hit me," and he went in after that. That's how feared Wee Willie Massino was. He'd been a loan shark collector and enforcer for Tony Accardo and a guy named Joseph Gagliano, who I don't know must have faded off into the woodwork by the 70s. 1970, he went to prison for kidnapping and beating a couple of contractors who owed money to the mob, George and Jack Chiagoris. Sound like they're maybe Greek, huh? After he got out of the penitentiary, he went to work as an advisor with Marco D'Amico, who is, remember Marco D'Amico had a gambling operation, and that's who Bob Cooley worked with a lot. And he also did some work for Jackie Cerrone. So James Turk Torello, he was confronted by the cops as he was unloading sound equipment out of his rear of his car. He yelled at him as they walked up. He said, "Hey," he said, "I got machine guns in these boxes. You want to come and see?" He was a kind of a wise ass, you know? He was a capo of the 26th Street Crew and directly under Fifi Buccieri. One time, he had been sent by an angry mob boss named Sam Giancana, who we all know, Mobo, and he was gonna partner up with Jackie Cerrone to kill an outfit member named Frankie Esposito down in Florida, but the Bureau had recorded Giancana's conversation and warned Esposito, and he came right back around. He didn't help the Bureau, you know, you go out and they warn a guy, and then you try to bring him in and make him a snitch or make him a cooperating witness in the end because they're trying to kill him. They don't all come in, and he ended up coming back to Chicago and settled his dispute with Giancana, and that hit was canceled. According to the tape recordings, Torello and his killers were going to murder Esposito and cut him up in small pieces and feed him to the sharks off the Florida coast. You know, they had houses down in Florida. That's where that was Jackie Cerrone's Florida house where they overheard him and Fifi talking about the murdering and torturing Action Jackson. Now, I mentioned bringing in the sound equipment. They had entertainment. Vic Damone was the entertainment that night. Now, Vic Damone has some long-held connections to the Chicago outfit and I believe the Genovese family. I didn't really go way in deep into him. I've got a bunch of notes. I may probably do a story just about Vic Damone. He was kind of maybe he was the character in The Singer and The Godfather. They kind of a blend of Frank Sinatra and Vic Damone as a singer in the Godfather movie. Guy's name, a couple brothers, Joseph and Donald Greco, were there. Well, they had been in business with Vic Damone in the Vic Damone Frozen Pizza Company. Paul Ricca and Fifi Buccieri had brought the famous singer Vic Damone into the outfits world and got him to lend his name to this frozen pizza business. And what they did, the Greco brothers, they used it as a cover for their loan shark activities. But you know, they sold pizzas too. Although I've never heard of, I don't ever remember seeing a Vic Damone frozen pizza. Vic Damone had even taken his show to Giancana's joint, the Armory, and if you ever been by the Armory, it's just like a neighborhood bar, a neighborhood joint. It is not a place, but Vic Damone was big, you know, he would be playing Madison Square Garden maybe at the time or the big clubs, the Copacabana in New York, and they got him to bring his show out to Giancana's joint, the Armory, kinda like at his Villa Venice. He got Sinatra, Dean Martin and Sammy Davis to bring their show there, and it was not exactly, you know, it was not the Copacabana. They tried to make it into the Copacabana of Chicago, but it never really got there. Another guy they saw was an outfit bookmaker and a tough guy out of Cicero who will get killed here in a little bit, Sam Sambo Cesario. He was a longtime workhorse. He's well-liked throughout the whole, you know, Chicago underworld, but he made a mistake. He ended up marrying a girlfriend slash mistress, the Gomar of Milwaukee, Phil Alderisio, while he was in the penitentiary. And two guys showed up. He said with this woman, he marries her. They're sitting out in front of their house. It was like a brownstone. They're sitting. It was a hot summer night. They're sitting out in lawn chairs out in front of their house, and two guys pull up and run up and kill him. They say Harry Ailman was the guy that did that. They call that I've had some kickback on this when I said this one time before a few years ago. I didn't really investigate into it, but, you know, the popular story is that it's the hit from beyond the grave because Alderisio had already died in prison between the time he gave that order and this actual murder. So that is a story of the big meeting at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. It was kind of like it wasn't exactly like Appalachian or some of the other famous mob meetings, and it was just Chicago only. They didn't identify that they named anybody from out of town at this thing. Seemed like it was a big money maker, maybe a meeting that you could hide some other little meetings in, get people in there that you didn't really want to be seen with in public. This article, they talked about other politicians and businessmen that were there, but they didn't really name them. They guess they didn't want to get sued or whatever. But it was definitely it was a fundraiser. He charged $25 a plate and then have that lottery for that car, and you know, they never gave that car to anybody, and you know how much money you can raise with you got, you know, 100 guys or so going out, mob guys going out and raising money, selling lottery tickets at $5 $10 each, you can raise a lot of money like that. So maybe it's just one more big Chicago scam and honored Fifi Buccieri at the time. I don't know. But anyhow, thanks a lot, guys. I thought it was an interesting story, and I thought you would find it interesting. And some of the people that they named that were there, I wish I'd have been there, but writing down license numbers and taking pictures and all that stuff. Uh, so keep coming back and, like and subscribe, as they say, and we're just going to keep doing this and doing this. I've gotten some, I've got some things up that are like non or fiction books that are based on mob stuff. I don't know if that's okay or not, but I kind of like mixing that up. There's only so many mob stories out there. I don't want a lot of these have already been told. I don't remember seeing any. I kind of looked around any other podcast having this story, so I try to find them. Give me any tips or comments that you can. I'll try to look it up, and if I can find enough information, I'll do the story on it. So thanks a lot, and adieu to you guys up in Chicago. I bet it's colder up there than it is down here. Thanks, guys. Here, thanks, guys. Here, thanks, guys.